everybody, welcome back to Let's Talk Toku. We are joined today with the Den of Geek writer, Shamus Kelley.
That's me! Den of Geek, Shamus Kelley, and 10,000 other things.
I was looking at your Twitter before we started everything, and you claim that you are an expert at Power Rangers.
I say this all the time when people ask me about that, is that I did not give myself that title. Shout Factory did.
Oh, okay.
Because when I was on one of their previous streams, I believe it was about Mega Ranger, or maybe it was Kaku Ranger, whichever one it was, they said, and also with facts from Power Rangers expert Shamus Kelley. And I was like, well, they said it, not me. So now that's been on every business card. That is like the first thing at like every social interaction I have. People go, what? What? I'm like, oh yeah. And then they ask me like, do you tell me something? I'm like, okay, you don't want to hear how deep I can go with this. So they got baked in a giant pizza one. It's fun. It's great. Whatever.
You got to go see my friend Joe over here. He's the big bad Beetleborg expert.
Woo!
He's not as cool or fun as a party as I am.
Sometimes you get people coming up and they do remember those things. And hey, I love all those Ameritoku shows too. And since I'm introing myself, I also made my own fan film, 21 JSR, that adapted Tomoka Hero Rescue Force. I started that back in high school and then all the way through college and even into when I moved to LA after college. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be very helpful for what we're going to talk about today. Has a lot to deal with footage and all that sort of stuff. And I learned a lot about how they make a tokusatsu and a Ameritoku thanks to working on that web series.
Well, you absolutely hit the nail on the head. Today we are going to talk about Power Rangers, but not just Power Rangers, the adaptation of Power Rangers and how that sort of comes to be. When I first pitched this show, so I got approached by Shout Factory to do this show. They wanted a talk show, and so I was like sending them stuff like, hey, we should buy this couch. You know, my guests can come and just hang out on the couch. And they're like, no, let's make it a little more informative. And I was like, oh, okay. I always had this idea of let's do a how to adapt series where I get people on a panel. If they're not familiar, sit down, they watch these Kamen Rider episodes, they watch this Power Ranger season that hasn't been adapted, and then we all discuss what would be the pros and the cons in the story that could work in America for that audience. How would you adapt that? And that's my other show. So Shout. Well, we can keep talking.
Well, what's so funny about that is that people so often nowadays, like they see like a whole Sentai season, they say, oh, how could we work? How could we bring this to America? But back in the day when they were adapting Zyuranger into MMPR, the thing was they didn't even look at all the footage. They literally hired somebody to cut out all of the shots of any of the Japanese actors. And that's no slate on all of them. You know, it's just the kind of thing they were doing. And they basically looked at saying, okay, here are all the shots we can use where you don't clearly see anybody's face, or there's not too much, it's just people running in the background. And then they came up with the plot that way instead of being like, well, again, this is at first, this changed in later years.
Of course.
But at first it was very much like we are making our own original thing and we're not even going to look at what they're doing in the Sentai.
That's amazing because we talked to Jason a couple episodes ago, Jason Narvi, who played Skull on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And he said that he was familiar with tokusatsu before he even got on the show. Like he knew about it. Like he, would go to all these like swap meets. He'd go to like these like grungy underground, like meetups, and he'd find like all these like toys and everything. But when he was working on the show, he said there wasn't anything that we could watch at that time, but they had what they call in production, the Bibles. So like what they had is just this giant tome of like pictures and information. And of course it's all in Japanese. It's all like the Zyuranger hieroglyphics that they used in the show. But they got an idea, they got a sense of like, okay, so they are these like ancient tribesmen, these knights, oh my God, they're being crucified on this one page. I don't know what that's about, but let's keep going. And that's kind of what they had to kind of work off of for the cast even. So it's crazy.
And it's wild too that even in later years, even by the time of In Space was rolling around, there's a document that's available on a website called, Project Hexagon, where they have an ever so delightful guide of how they put together all of like they have like a guide for, okay, we have the first 25 episodes of Mega Ranger. Yeah. We're going to break it down into what each episode's plot is basically footage wise, like when are weapons used, what characters can we use, that sort of thing. So it's just fascinating to see the process that's put together into all that. That's where my primary interest in Power Rangers comes from. Obviously, I love the show.
Yeah.
I love the characters. I love all of that. But the creativity that's involved in making Power Rangers has never gotten enough cred from the wider geekscape. But thankfully now we have places like your show and TokuSHOUTsu to sort of bring a light to that immense creativity.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, a lot of people, like, personally, when I was in high school, I got bullied a lot because I would sit there on my laptop. I would be watching Super Sentai, which I had just found out about. But, you know, the year before that, I was sitting there watching Power Rangers, like Operation Overdrive or something. And so people got the idea of like, oh, this kid's like 16 and he watches Power Rangers still, which, yeah, I get it. Whatever. But getting into Sentai, kind of getting that understanding that this was originally something else. And it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their brains around that, because a lot of times, like, even the movie Parasite, which just came out and won like Oscars, like, everybody's like, I don't want to watch it if it's subtitled. Why can't they just dub it? Why can't they just remake it? You know? But like, the beauty is that it is this thing, and if someone took, like, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but like Kung Pao Enter the Fist was 2 Chinese martial arts films that then put a white guy into it and completely turned it into something else. Like, the level of just everything that went into it, like, as a kid, you watch it and you're like, this is great, this is crazy, what are they doing? And then as an adult, you're like, this is great, this is crazy, how are they doing this?
Well, it's so wild, right, is that Power Rangers really got a lot of its ideas from, I've always said that the 2 genetic parents of Power Rangers are obviously Saved by the Bell and an anime show called Robotech, because that anime show combined 3 different Japanese anime series and made it into one giant story. And Tony Oliver, who helped create Power Rangers, was one of the voices on that show, and a lot of the voice talent ended up being in Power Rangers. So, and I also do a Robotech podcast, Skullcast, shameless plug right there. But it's one of those things where you see how that sort of started because of how anime was being brought over in the 70s and 80s, where they had to change a lot of things. And then the way Power Rangers was made was kind of just a growth out of that, but taken to a whole new scale because it had to be live action.
Obviously, with an anime, with something from that time, you have to recast, you have to redub, you have to relay the entire soundscape. And then you look at Power Rangers and you see a lot of things kind of doing something similar today, but like in the early 90s, taking this Japanese show and completely turning it into something else, refilming everything, it's revolutionary. I think you're right. Power Rangers does not get enough credit for that creativity, that sort of step, that spark that they kind of added to this medium that, until they, you know, were on the scene, didn't really exist. Like, you got your Godzilla movies where, like, I guess Godzilla kind of did that, where
they did it with Raymond Burr, definitely. I mean, he's like the initial example, and it's interesting that even to this day, it sort of has stuck around as kind of the last remnant of that time where we felt like we had to adapt things to get people to watch them. I think if someone was trying to pitch Power Rangers today, there would probably be a bit more pushback of like, should we do that? Like, is that right to do it this way? But Power Rangers is so entrenched in the way it's made, and honestly, the way I think it keeps getting made, I mean, this is just a personal opinion, this is not an insider thing, is that the way that it gets made is that this is the way that it exists and how it will probably always exist in some way, unless someone's willing to put, you know, movie money behind it. I think that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah, there's really nothing that's comparable to what they did there. Like, in anywhere Hollywood, you know, like you said, you got to pump a lot of money into it. You have to remake it. You know, it's a soft reboot. You know, there's no such thing as, let's just take this one element and make a whole another show out of it in another country. I mean, it's like imagine for a second if you took all the Marvel movies, let's say someone in Japan took all the Marvel movies and they're like, hey, this footage of Iron Man is great, but anytime that helmet opens, we're going to put our own actor in there. I mean, I would love to see that, by the way. Because people, I remember even in the 90s, I've seen discussions where people were talking about, oh, like, I can't believe they're doing it this way. Like, imagine if you tried to put like Star Trek and Star Wars and like edit them together into one show and then add new actors with like the space footage. And I'm like, okay, one, that would be amazing to watch. I would watch that so hard. But again, Power Rangers, the way they've done it over the years has also been different. People remember MMPR and they're like, oh yeah, like Rita's like, you know, her words don't necessarily match the mouth movements.
But over the years, the way they used that footage became increasingly fascinating, especially to the people who are watching this channel.
Maybe, Shamus, you can help me here. I don't know if this is a real thing that actually happened to me or if it's some lucid dream, because I remember being very sick when it happened. But
ooh, okay.
I used to watch the TV Asai, like, streams.
Whoa!
I used to watch.
All right.
Yeah, I used to watch like Sentai and Kamen Rider live every Saturday, and I remember I tuned in like a couple hours too early. And typically at that time in Japan, you would find like news, you would find like infomercials, like you would here, at like 4 a.m. They were playing Inspector Gadget, the movie, with Brendan Fraser. However, Brendan Fraser wasn't in the movie. It was replaced by Japanese cast for that side. The villain, Claw, was still the same, and he was overdubbed, clearly, and really badly. But I
have not heard of. Are you sure this is real?
That's why I wanted to bring it up. Maybe someone watching knows.
Maybe more people are doing this than we know, right? Like, there's now obviously, like, I say obviously, I don't think everybody knows this, is that there have been other countries that in the 70s did do what Power Rangers ended up doing. I know they did it with Kamen Rider. I think they did it with Inframan as well. So this is not unique to America, but definitely America has made an art form out of it. And then it's weird to know that then they re-import Power Rangers to Japan and dub that over, sometimes with the same Sentai cast. It's like, that's a whole sick. So what we should then do is then readapt that. Anyway,
it's like when you're in science class and they show you like photosynthesis. It's Power Ranger synthesis. It just keeps renewing itself over and over again. Hey, don't go nowhere. We will be right back with some more Let's Talk Toku. Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk Toku. We're here with Shamus Kelley, who is talking to us about Power Rangers and the seasons that were adapted from the source material, Super Sentai.
So, we got to start it off with Mighty Morphin, right?
Yeah.
The absolute, Zyuranger and MMPR could not be more different. We were just saying before the break that they really looked at the footage, didn't even look at what the plot was. And it's rather infamous that they looked at the first about 12 or 13 episodes of Zyuranger, and they're like, okay, cool, we can start making the show now. It's great. Then Tony Oliver, who is really an unsung hero these days about like who helped create Power Rangers, is that he's like, okay, did the first batch. All right, time to look at the second batch. There's a green one. Okay, we got to cast another guy. So they were really flying by the seat of their pants with that one. But also the way they adapted it is that people like to think that there's a one-to-one correlation. One episode of Sentai becomes one episode of Power Rangers. These days, that's more or less true. Back then, even in the very first episode, there's footage from about 20 different Sentai episodes in one episode of Power Rangers. There's a great fan website called Morphology that tracks it shot by shot, telling you what episode it came from. Here's the shot from Zyuranger, the time code of the Power Rangers episode. It is absolutely magnificent. If you're and if you're watching this show, this is something that you definitely have interest in. Definitely go check that out.
I feel like I do that a lot. Like when my girlfriend or any of my friends like sit down and they watch Power Rangers I don't really ever have like a reason that we just kind of sit there and watch Power Rangers. Maybe like a new one will come out or something, and I'll just sit there and I'll be like, that's Sentai footage. That's original footage. Oh, that's Sentai footage again. Yep.
And it's a lot easier to tell in the older seasons, definitely. Nowadays, it's a little harder to tell. Sometimes you can tell, this is how nerdy we are, right? That you can tell by the lighting of the shot, where it's like, that's definitely Japan lighting. This is America lighting. But Zyuranger, in watching it, they cut out a lot of things. They cut out the battle bikes, as they were going to be called in America. They cut out a lot of, obviously, they cut out some violence. But the ways they adapted around it is that in Zyuranger, like, Burai is stuck in this little dimension all by himself.
Hyperbolic time chamber.
Yeah, and he only comes out for because he's like, the more he comes out, like he's gonna die. The thing is that's why in MMPR Tommy's always late. That's why he's stuck at detention. That's why he actually doesn't get involved in that many ground fights as a Ranger then, because of the footage. And that's one of those creative things that Power Rangers really had to do, was we have to come up with a reason, no matter how wonky it ends up being.
Speaking of weird like parallel dimensions that people find themselves in, that's where I sent Steven after messing up that last episode. Steven, he was my intern.
Oh, Steven. Bye, Steven.
Yeah, emphasis on was. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, they look at like everything that like because Jason even brought up, like, he said, okay, so the green one and the red one are brothers, because in Jew Ranger they are brothers, and Green, apparently unbeknownst to him, killed his family, killed Red's, parents, his parents effectively as well. And like, things get dark, things get a little crazy in that. And the way the Power Rangers kind of just adapted it, that, okay, he's a new kid, he's a little naughty, okay, now he's evil, but now he's good, and kind of just segueing that through was really, really fun, in two folds as a kid to watch it, because obviously you think that this is brand new, that this is exactly what they're doing, that this is how it was planned. And then as an adult, to go back and watch them really just fly by, just go and do whatever they want there.
Well, then the thing that comes up next in the history of Power Rangers is that there's a bunch of footage from Japan that never showed up in Jew Ranger, and that's what fans have called the Jew 2 footage. Actually, there's also Jew 1.5 footage. There's a lot of footage of Rita on her balcony where she is mouthing American words. They shot that very specifically for Power Rangers. They dropped that in throughout the whole first season. Yeah, getting the goods on here. So if there's any time where Rita is standing by herself and like there's no one else behind her, that's probably a Jew 1.5 shot. There's some shots of the bad guys. There's a lot of like Goldar kind of like waving his sword, talking. They shot for about 2 or 3 days in Japan. They brought back the original actress for it just to have drop-in shots for America. But then they took it to the next level with Jew 2, which a lot of more people know about, where they commissioned 20 to 25 new episodes. Now, it's not that they shot more Jew Ranger. They specifically shot it for America, and they gave them, from what we understand, they gave them some directives like the Blue Ranger's the smart one, the Green and the Pink Ranger have a romance, which they did not have in Jew Ranger, and they basically made that for America because they were so quickly trying to churn out Power Rangers. They're like, oh, this thing is super successful. Okay, our show is going to be 40 episodes. We've got to make it 60 episodes. We'll use the last like dregs of Jew Ranger that we have, and then we'll commission all this new footage. But that didn't last for that long, obviously. So then they had to go right in to Die Ranger. Mm-hmm. Now, Die Ranger is sort of the mythical lost season of Power Rangers. In some ways, people are like, whatever happened to those suits? They find out. I remember as a kid being on the internet in the very late 90s and seeing these suits. I'm like, who are these Power Rangers and why are they hanging out with the White Ranger? What's going on there? Right? I think we all had that moment, especially in early internet Toku fandom, right? Mm-hmm. But there, Power Rangers was just so popular that they did not want to get rid of the suits. They did not want to get rid of all of that stuff. So instead, they're like, okay, we'll use the monsters, we'll use the Zords. Yes, exactly. But we'll cut out the Rangers. And that's why you saw a lot more American fights up at Castaic Lake, which is where they shot in Los Angeles. That's why you saw a lot of that. And honestly, it was the exact same thing for season 3 as well, at least for the start of it. Now, the interesting thing about that season is that they took the Kaku Ranger footage, which, your shirt right there, killing it, making it happen, is they switched the Zord footage. So they started with the animals, but in Kaku Ranger, they started with what became the Shogun Zords. They flipped it around. I don't know if we ever learned an exact reason why. It's probably because they used the animals for the movie. So they wanted to make that work. And also there was more of them so they could have more of the Rangers in there. Mm-hmm. But then finally at the end of the season, they're like, okay, we're going to have these kids so we can bring in the Alien Rangers. And they're probably just a breath of fresh air. Like, oh my God, we can finally use action footage again from these shows. And you see it in the very first episode, the Alien Rangers show up there. You can almost feel the editors and the writers and the budget counters going, oh, thank God, we can use like 7 minutes of footage. Oh, thank Lord.
It's crazy because at Power Morphicon, what was that, 2018 was the last one. Celebrity Icons had a bunch of Japanese guests there, and they had the guy who played Kaku Ranger Red, and we got to do interviews for him because I used to work for a group called the Tokusatsu Network. Right on. And we did a video interview with him, and he was so upset because they also had the guy who played the White Die Ranger, which would become most famously Tommy. He was like, the biggest one that he was there, and he had, like a big head on his shoulders because he's like, I get to become Tommy. And I got to introduce him to Jason David Frank, which was a huge fun event. And then as soon as I did that, I look over and I see Kaku Ranger Red just watching me, just like with like this look on his face. And then we immediately went and did his interview, and he's just like, I want to know what happened in America in the 90s. And I said, why? He's like, well, you look at so and so, and he becomes the most iconic Power Ranger. What am I? I'm some like alien? What? It's crazy, like just thinking of Mighty Morphin as being 3 Sentai seasons, but it's technically one like team here. Like I really feel that Power Rangers hit it on the head. Obviously, it was super successful. It went huge. It went, in the terms of the millennials, viral. But it went crazy because they really hit it on the head of what it means to be a team. Like, in Japan, like I have a lot of Japanese friends that we've talked a little bit about kind of the scope of this. In Japan, a lot of people want and look up to other heroes. They look up to a Kamen Rider. They look up to Ultraman. They look up to this team of unknown heroes that are going to save them and protect them and save the day, because they're like, I just want someone to take care of that problem. I'm going to stick to my lane over here. But America, it's all about, I want to be that hero. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And so to get it perfect with teenagers with attitude, and they get to be those heroes instead of just this tribe, which it works for Japan, you know?
Yeah. What I think is so interesting is that the fact that you had those same teenagers more or less continue over all those different years and go through all these big like power escalations. The way that they use that footage, intentionally or not, to basically be like, okay, you got Rita, then you got Zed, who's an even bigger villain. Then you got Master Vile, who's an even bigger villain. And the fact that you have the same cast, again, more or less, facing these successive threats made you feel more connected to them because you were watching them go on a journey and you were taking that with them at the same time.
I really wish that, and no disrespect to what is going on with like Hasbro or the Disney era or anything with Power Rangers, but I really admire the idea of transporting similar characters and similar heroes through different, things of spandex, as you might say.
Yes.
Like I really appreciated that as a kid. Like, Tommy's not my favorite character, but to see him go from this sort of like extra character, this sort of villain, to this like side leader, to the actual leader and like Zeo and Turbo, and then handing that off to somebody else, like that was huge for me. Like that was just comparing that to like a season where it's like, all right, we are Time Force, we have finished our story, Wild Force, take it over.
Yep. It's interesting, right? And it's, there's a lot of discussions you could have about like, oh, does that make it more popular, or is it better if you have like a different season every year? I don't have all the answers to that, and it's extremely subjective. But I do know, going back to the main topic of this thing, is that when the Rangers turned over to what became Zeo and they used the O-Ranger footage, that was a jump off point for a lot of people, because they're like, whoa, this is too different. I don't like this. Like, yeah, it's the same people, but it looks different. Like, I love those designs. But again, O-Ranger is very similar to the other ones, where it's not the same show. The villains are very different. They take out a lot of the stuff about the villains. O-Ranger had a lot of great stuff with its villains that they just completely changed, took out a lot of footage, but they still made it work, and they made it Power Rangers, and they turned yet again a child Sentai character, Sentai Ranger, into, it's this alien from another planet. No, actually, it's Jason who's coming back. Again, the creativity there and what they did, fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go back to Zyuranger for a bit. So you've seen every season of Sentai that has been turned into Power Rangers. This is kind of like a hobby of yours, you would say?
I get paid for it at Den of Geek, so it's definitely more than a hobby. And I've been paid to be a Power Rangers expert, so it's definitely. And I made that fan film series where I basically used it as an excuse to study how they made this stuff. That wasn't the exact intention, but it certainly was a byproduct. So more than a hobby, I would say, yes.
So with Zyuranger, what do you think some of the pros and the strengths of that season was that kind of seeped into Power Rangers that maybe made it more successful because they went with that season versus, I don't know, Jetman? I mean, obviously the dinosaurs was a big thing.
I was going to say, I think that they lucked out tremendously in that it was dinosaurs, those designs. Now, it's easy to say in retrospect, of course, they're iconic. Like, maybe if Jetman came first, those would be iconic too. But there's something about how clean those designs look. And how even when, like, I know there's a bunch of, like, the American press material tried to add coins to the chest, which did not exist, the very early promo stuff people remember. that was the biggest thing about Zyuranger is they lucked out in how good it all looked. I think that the Zyuranger season itself, watching it, and I know a lot of people back in the day, that was the big thing of I want to watch Zyuranger. And when you watch it, like, it's a completely fine Sentai season. I'm not going to come on here and say it's bad. Is that it doesn't like live up as this like, oh, it's completely different, or it's just like Power Rangers. It's a perfect, and I'm sure you could talk to a Japanese fan, they would have their own, opinion on it. I would think it's a very average Sentai season that they managed to take this footage, take this incredible looking stuff, and make it into something that became very iconic for a whole different audience. So I think it's the suits and the fight footage that was the biggest boon to them, easily.
You look at a lot of people online who are Japanese fans who grew up with it. I used to be on this forum where like people would post like tweets and like Facebook posts from people in Japan who would be gushing over, Westerners doing cosplay of Super Sentai, and they're like, why are they doing this season? And then someone has to come in and be like, well, that's Mighty Morphin, to them, and they're like, oh, I didn't like Zyuranger. Well,
it's got to be wild for them. Is that like I can only imagine what it was like for a Japanese fan at the time to see like MMPR the movie, and here we have the Zyurangers with the White Dye Ranger hanging out in the Kaku Ranger mecha. I don't think there's ever been an adaptation like that in any medium whatsoever, and it must be wild for them to be like, wow, they're remaking Zyuranger again in 2017, and it's going to happen again in the future. They're like, why do they like Zyuranger so much?
I do remember seeing a couple of like Japanese comments on like the movie trailer that was just like, why Zyuranger? Why not just do TokuSHOUTsu or whatever was on at that time?
Why don't you just remake like Bioman or something like that? I'm sure a lot of people are saying that too.
You know too much about me, before the show and everything, but I had a YouTube channel where I did a lot of tokusatsu stuff where I talked about like Sentai, Kamen Rider. Some of it's kind of clickbaity, yeah, whatever. We've crossed that boat, everybody. But I did a series kind of like what I was talking about, how to adapt, where I talked about Go Busters, and I was like, how do you actually take what they have? What kind of a story could you develop from that? And it's just so much fun because you get to see all the comments. You get to see everybody just kind of make their voice heard. And a lot of times you write something or you put something out there that's just like, this is what I came up with. This is what I did. It's like a math problem. Like, of course, 2 + 2 = 4. But in this case, like, you get an array of answers. You get an array of, just people coming in and doing whatever they will. And it's just it's so beautiful. It
is beautiful, and seeing even that there was Ahmed Bamik, who was the story editor of Wild Force. He came out one day and was like, "Oh yeah, I had the whole big pitch for Ninja Storm, or what he wanted to adapt Hurricaneger to be, what he wanted to adapt Go Busters to be, and whatever you feel about those pitches." It was interesting to see that. Oh, this could have been what it became. So it's like an official fan version of what it could have been. It's so fascinating because I see those discussions, and personally, I always look at it as I would, like, let's say I were making Power Rangers, I would want to know nothing about the Sentai season. I would want to know absolutely nothing. I would give me the photos and then show me the footage, but do not tell me what the story is. Do not put subtitles on that footage. Now, I say that as someone who, in my perfect world, would have a lot of time to develop the season. I know that Judd Lin / Chip Lin, as he goes by now, when he was working on the show, he said that sometimes they were working such long hours, it was taking so long to write that eventually it became, is the Sentai plot good? Does that mean that I don't have to work until 11 o'clock at night? Great. This footage works. We'll just use the story. It's fine. And that's how a lot of those sort of later seasons like Lightspeed, Time Force, and he didn't work on Wild Force, but it's sort of the same principle, that they became sort of more Sentai light version, or I should say they're more Power Rangers light, and they became more less adaptations of the Sentai and a little more translate-y. They changed some things, definitely, but there have been Power Ranger seasons that still do that in the future as well. Basically, there are Power Ranger seasons that are very, very different. There are some Power Ranger seasons, like, say, Power Ranger Samurai, that feel like, okay, you really just reshot the Sentai season.
Oh, man, when you brought up Gokaiger just a little bit ago,
sure,
I wanted to mention that the poster you have behind you is the Gokaiger with all 199 heroes. You're the 200. You're the 200 right here.
There is, It's so wild to when that clip came out. I remember the internet losing their minds when they saw that, and all the fans. Then this also brings up an even bigger, broader point. Is that? But I'll use that as an example. When that scene aired, people immediately began to say, how are they going to adapt this for Power Rangers? Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, the first photos of a Sentai season come out and people will say, I don't know if they're going to adapt that for Power Rangers. I'm like, it's a photo?
Yeah.
We don't know how they're going to adapt it. People get into like a very narrow mindset of like, it's going to be like this. It's either going to be like the Japanese season or I don't like the design. It can't work. People for years have been like, Tokuger, I don't know about that. I would love to see them try to do it. I remember when I interviewed Peter Sudarso, who played Preston on Power Rangers Ninja Steel. He said he's like, I would love to do it like a Jumanji style, where it's like these kids, like little kids, get sucked into a video game, or maybe that was for Zyuohger, whatever it was, but taking some ideas from Tokuger. Mm-hmm. These kids get sucked into a game. They have to pretend to be adults, which would then help explain why sometimes in Power Rangers we all complain that it's like, it's a little childish. Why are they acting like this? Like, well, if they were actually kids in the bodies of teenagers, that would explain a lot.
You know, what's really funny too is the poster that I have behind me. Are you familiar with that series?
Oh, Q Ranger. Yes, of course. Of course.
Are you familiar with everything that's been going on Twitter and online right now with?
No, honestly, like I used to be very into like the fandom Twitter discussions. And honestly, I've stepped away from it quite a bit just for my own mental health. And also just because it's like, it's cool to have those discussions, but I'm the kind of person who's like, once the thing gets announced, I'll talk about that. I'm not the biggest theory kind of guy.
Well, with the new adaptation that Power Rangers is going to take, they had 4 choices, and everybody was real upset that this one didn't get made. So I put it in the show for you guys. There you go.
With like Toei and the Japanese company, and they consulted with Bandai of America in making Q Ranger. Mm-hmm. That's why so many people to this day are like, of course it's going to get adapted. And I remember even Nickelodeon posting a photo from that season because they were referencing an article that I wrote. And I'm like, whatever intern posted this did not, they don't know what they just unleashed.
Good luck.
Buddy. I think that they could still go back to it. I mean, people are like, the minute that a new season gets announced and they say, I guess none of this other stuff's going to get adapted. Dude, they went back for Go Busters like almost 5 years later, more than that, I think. Mm-hmm. Anything. Now, look, in a perfect world, I would love them to see like they like just announce like, all right, the new Sentai season that's going to be adapted is Jacka. It would never happen, but anything can also happen. So once you accept that and embrace it, just have fun with whatever gets announced.
Welcome back, everybody, to Let's Talk Toku. We are talking about the Super Sentai series that have been transferred into Power Ranger seasons here in the West. And what's really funny is we were bringing up Go Busters, kind of going back on that, and how Q Rangers was the obvious choice. I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm an actor, and I have auditioned for Power Rangers quite a few times.
Ooh, I bet.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. But I remember, what was it, like 3 years ago-ish? All my friends, I had a lot of friends online that were like getting buff, getting everything, like training, and they were just like, all right, I think I can see myself if I do this as the Silver Ranger. I could be the Gold Ranger on this team, and everyone's like going crazy. And because I worked at the Tokusatsu Network, one of my friends on there who works in Japan, who works for like all these things, got a heads up, got an early tip, and he's just like, hey, yo, man, it's Go Busters. Just and I was like,
just plan for that.
I am not gonna do any more Nada training as Yellow. I'm gonna just jump into this, and I gotta see how they do their moves. So it's really fun just to kind of see like what on kind of all sides, how everybody kind of prepares and gets excited for that season. And Go Busters kind of took everybody for a loop.
I love that. I love that it took people for a loop. That's the thing, is that anytime Power Rangers is very predictable, that's boring. I like when things just get thrown out the window. That's what I love about this new Hasbro era, even though it's really hasn't even totally begun yet, is that we don't know what's going to happen. And that makes some people afraid, but I love it. I want to see them just take the show in the most wild direction. Like they could make it for preschoolers. They could make like a Riverdale style thing. Like any direction they go is fresh and new and different. And I know they talked about it, some of like their like business meetings or whatever, that like, oh yeah, like the show has been kind of the same thing for a couple of years. Let's take it in a new direction. That excites me to know, even if like it ends up being not that great, it's different. And after studying this show for over 25 years, I am down for different. You know what I mean?
What if they took like one season and made it that preschool version, made it
a
Riverdale version, like, and they're all the same cast, but it's just like a specific version. Wouldn't that be crazy?
I mean, the way you were saying that is that I thought that they wouldn't even necessarily use the same cast. They just have the different, like, you know, footage.
Like they use the same footage, but it's like
like they
like say bubble sound effects, or it's
well, it's like, let's say they take TokuSHOUTsu, and that's the preschool show. That's the easy one to say it's a preschool show, right?
Yeah.
Is they just shoot that with a certain cast, you know, whatever cast they decide. Then they do Q Ranger, let's say for an example, and that's the regular Power Rangers, right? And then they take
sophisticated season.
And then Zyuohger becomes the dark, gritty blood version that everybody wants, like, which would throw people for a loop, but you never know. It's so funny with Power Rangers, right? And there's so many different kinds of ways they can do it. And this is going back to sort of our main topic about how they adapt Power Rangers. You can kind of break Power Rangers up into different eras of how it was adapted. Basically, from MMPR all the way through about Turbo, even in space a little bit. No, I would say Turbo. That was we're going to do whatever we want. There's very little direct adaptations of Sentai episodes. There's a couple. Famously, I believe the Aryutan episode of Power Rangers Turbo, the one where there's like, where TJ's like, wait, Aryutan spelled backwards is nature. What? That plot was taken from, I believe, a Mega Ranger episode, I want to say, which is weird that it ends up in Power Rangers Turbo, but go figure. That was We Can Do Anything. But once In Space starts, and this goes all the way through Wild Force, you started seeing direct adaptations of Sentai more and more. Everybody loves the Psycho Ranger arc, but it is just translating Mega Ranger more or less for about 7 episodes and using as much footage as they can.
But it was good.
Lost Galaxy really ran into a trouble of, we're trying to do a very original season, but also let's just adapt some Sentai episodes. Like the absolutely inane Lights of Orion arc, where it's like, oh yes, the Lights of Orion are hidden in an ordinary camera. And it's like, that's because I was in Sentai, but this makes no sense on a space colony. What is going on? And then Lightspeed very much becomes like, ooh, this is kind of Go-Go 5 light. Time Ranger became Time Force, which is very much, it's just Time Ranger with a couple things changed. Wild Force, very few things are changed. So that was one era. Now people have talked about who's responsible for this. Is it Judd Lin? Is it, Jonathan Zakor? We don't know the answer at the end of the day, but that's just the style that it ended up being. Then you get a little 2 pocket years, which I call the Doug and Ann years, which are Doug Sloan and Ann Austin, who made Ninja Storm and Dino Thunder. We got back to, we're going to make whatever we want. It was they had worked on Zeo. They had worked on the first half of Turbo. So you saw those elements coming back into play. Then you get the Kalash years, which is SPD, Mystic Force, Overdrive, Jungle Fury, where that became, we're still doing our own original thing, but we're going to have a US exclusive overplot. So this would be a plot that would run through the whole season, but a lot of the individual episodes would be adaptations of the Sentai episodes. You'll see that a lot, and sometimes that's where, like, why is there an episode of Jungle Fury where Theo has a twin brother, even though the actor doesn't have a twin brother in real life? It's because it was a Sentai episode. That's why. Then you get RPM, which everybody looks at as, it's completely original. Whether it bankrupted the season or not, there are conflicting reports about that, but basically, it was its own thing. Then you get the 4 years of Zacher again with Outland, and it becomes Samurai this is Shinkenger. That's what it is. And I remember talking to James W. Bates, who is the story editor, and he tried to put as much original stuff in there as he could.
And they said no.
It was basically just decided that it's cheaper to do it this way.
Yeah.
So they tried to add Bulk and Spiker in there, and they had to remove some things because of the violence, but more or less it was the same thing. But I give it up to the people who have to work under those constraints, how difficult, especially for a story editor there. It's like, I'm trying to make something original, but not. Then you get Megaforce and Super Megaforce, which are not adaptations of Go Sager and Go Kaiger. I mean, there's some plots where it's like, okay, this is clearly sort of an adaptation, but it was its own thing. Then you get Judd Lin again, And this is where he's not doing Sentai plots anymore. He's doing like Dino Charge is very much different from Kyoryuger. Mm-hmm. Same thing with like Ninja Steel. Ninja Steel is not a ninja in any way, shape, or form. And certainly with like Beast Morphers and Go Busters, they're not the same thing. Mm-hmm. So you're seeing these ebbs and flows where it's like original, not so original, original, not so original. And this up and down is not meant as like an indicator of quality. It's just like showing the differences. Mm-hmm. And there are some people who you talk to online and they say it should be basically a remake of Sentai. And there are some people who say it should be as original as possible. For me, as long as the story's good and it works, like everybody, like not everybody, I don't want to use hyperbole. A lot of people, hyperbole and Toku fan, that's crazy. Time Force is a great season. Is it basically like not a complete translation of Time Ranger, but mostly? Yes. Does it work because of the things they changed, how they added Rancic in, how they made Gluto not the main villain and they cut down on the farts? Yes, it works very, very well. Now, there are some seasons, like I would argue Wild Force suffers from it because it's trying to be too much like the Japanese season and it doesn't work as well. Now, I'm not saying they should sit there and say, is this story good enough? It really comes down to the individual executive producer about what they want to do and what their budget is. Now, theoretically, you could save budget by just doing the plot, but would you still be able to use the same amount of footage? I think that they get very stuck these days in like, well, it's this one episode of Sentai, we're just going to use episodes from that. Whereas back in the day, they had you just mix and match the footage. Like I did this when I did my fan series 21 JSR, where now I only did like 9 episodes of that. So it's way easier to do this where I'm like, all right, here's a fight from one episode. Then you get the very famous flip over the camera shot. Boom, they're in another location. It's a whole nother episode. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you see that in MMPR all the time. All that flip over the camera, that was the greatest transition ever to get from one fight to another in a great way of extending it.
It's fun. Like, it's almost like being like a chef in the kitchen. Like, sometimes something needs a little more salt. Sometimes, something needs to cook a little bit. Sometimes, you got to get it off the grill, And I think that's kind of with Sentai. Like, Samurai has a lot of good things, but again, it is kind of a 1-to-1 ratio where if they would have changed it instead of having everything being overtly, like Japanese, you have a Japanese character come to America and have to introduce all of that. Then that would make sense. Just small little fixes like that, I feel like is like playing, chef in a kitchen.
I think your chef analogy is very, very good because people like to, use like every season has to be adapted that way. And just like every single food, you don't cook it the same way. Exactly. There are some seasons that need way more like hack and slashing of the footage. And there are some that you might look at and go, this is great. Why would we change this? Yeah, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
You know what else is perfect?
What?
This episode.
Yes!
I'm just going to say right now, this has been a fun episode, but all right, well, that's all that we have for today. Shamus, where can we find you? Where can we read some of your articles? I know Den of Geek, but where else?
So basically, Den of Geek is the first place that you can find all of my amazing work about Power Rangers, like discovering all different kinds of things about the show. We've been going through all these old archives to answer some of these big questions, like, were the Die Rangers ever going to actually show up in the show before Super Megaforce? I talked to one of the longtime writers on the show, Jackie Marchand, and she gave us a definitive answer. So go search Power Rangers, Die Ranger, Den of Geek, and you'll find it there. It's really great writing for that website. I love getting to also touch on a lot of stuff that is very personal to me as a pansexual man, getting to talk about how I remember when the 2017 movie came out, I talked a lot about Trini being gay in that movie and how that meant a lot to me personally. Other things you can find me on my Twitter, twitter.com/WriterJetfire. Hit me up with all your questions. And you can also find me on some older episodes, but I occasionally pop up now and then on the No Pink Spandex podcast where they talk about all things Power Rangers, and I do a Robotech podcast at Roboskullcast, roboskullcast.libsyn.com. Again, one of the genetic parents of Power Rangers, as I talked about early in this episode. We have a lot of fun there. So I think that's all, my good sir.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you guys for tuning into another episode of Let's Talk Toku. You guys know where you can find me. I mean, until further notice, I'll be here. Help.
He'll find you're not leaving.
Awesome. We will see you guys next time on Let's Talk Toku.
See ya.